At first glance, Wales seems like nothing more than a green patchwork tucked between mountains and coastline. But behind this quiet landscape lies one of the last regions in Britain where land, history, and freedom can still be found for a fraction of what you'd pay anywhere else in the UK. For centuries, the Welsh interior was shaped by small farming communities, isolated by the peaks of Ararai, the valleys of the Brecon Beacons, and the rolling countryside of Powys and Ceredigion. Stone farmhouses, many of them over a century old, still stand on quiet hilltops, surrounded by pastures, streams, and woodland that rarely appear on any tourist map. It is precisely this isolation that, ironically, preserved the charm and kept prices remarkably low. While the rest of the United Kingdom faces a housing crisis pushing entire families out of the cities, Wales remains something of a well-kept secret. Here, it's still possible to find properties with acres of land, stone barns, old stables, and views that seem to pause time itself, all for prices that anywhere else in England would barely buy a flat. Over the next few minutes, we'll walk through 5 hidden Welsh farmhouses tucked between hills, rivers, and forests, each one carrying its own story, its own architecture, and an amount of land that seems to belong to another era. Places that prove there is still space, silence, and belonging for sale, for those who know where to look. At first glance, it looks like just another farmhouse tucked among open fields and low stone walls. The kind of property you stumble upon by chance, following a narrow lane called Tyder Road on the outskirts of the village of Nelson, in the county borough of Caerphilly. But anyone who steps closer soon realizes this house carries more history than it lets on. Seen from above, it stands alone in a green plot spanning nearly 3/4 of an acre, bordered by dry stone walls and fields belonging to neighboring farms for generations. The white facade, framed by dark slate roofs, reveals classic Georgian architecture, symmetrical lines, vertical windows arranged in near mathematical order, but a closer look hints at something older behind it. The uneven proportions of one wing, the lower ceilings, and small variations in the stonework suggest that part of the original structure is even older than the Georgian facade wrapped around it, as though the house had been rebuilt around itself over the centuries. The entrance leads into a hall that keeps the sobriety typical of Welsh country houses. No excessive ornamentation, just the solidity of walls thick enough to withstand generations of damp winters rolling in from the valley. The rooms spread out generously inside, for bedrooms across the floors, 3 bathrooms, and 4 reception rooms, suggesting a house built for family gatherings and for the unhurried rhythm of rural life. Original fireplaces still occupy some of the rooms, silent witnesses to winters spent by the fire, while the old wooden floors creak underfoot with that particular sound only well-lived houses make. Outside, the south-facing garden catches the light for much of the day, a detail earlier residents surely valued in a region where sunshine isn't always generous. Mature trees are scattered across the grounds, some clearly planted decades ago, offering shade and a certain sense of permanence that only time can build. Around it all, fields stretch out in every direction, reinforcing a quiet sense of isolation, even though the everyday life of the village is only minutes away. And it is that very village that helps explain something of the house's own origins. Nelson began as a small farming settlement in the Taff Bargod Valley, north of Cardiff, but grew significantly in the 19th century with the arrival of the railway and coal mining, which brought workers, many of them Irish, into the area. Curiously, the village's name has nothing to do with farming or mining at all, but with a local pub, the Lord Nelson Inn, named after the British admiral who passed through the region in the early 1800s on his way to inspect the ironworks at Merthyr Tydfil. That pub gave its name to the railway station and, by association, to the entire village that grew up around it. Just a few minutes away lies one of the region's most remarkable historical treasures, Langcake Form Manor, a fortified Tudor manor house built in 1530, which still brings to life the everyday world of the English Civil War. A reminder that this now quiet corner of Wales once played host to decisions that shaped the fate of entire kingdoms. Living here means accepting a different rhythm, Mornings begin with low mist over the neighboring fields. Weekends stretch out along trails that cut through the valley. And the most common sound at dusk is wind moving through the trees, not traffic. Cardiff lies just 10 miles away, close enough to keep city life within reach, without it ever intruding on the quiet of the property. And it is against that very contrast between the modesty of the facade and the quiet richness of everything it holds that it finally feels right to reveal the asking price for this house, £795,000. But if this property already reveals hidden layers behind a simple facade, the next one takes us even deeper into the Welsh interior, where the landscape begins to change completely. At first glance, it could be mistaken for one of those grand Georgian houses that turn up on postcards of the Welsh countryside. But stepping through the entrance gate reveals something far rarer. 42 hectares, or roughly 104 acres, of land stretching between the Towy Valley and the hills surrounding it, in a stretch of countryside between the small settlements of Altiferan and Nancaredig, in the heart of Carmarthenshire. The pale yellow facade, framed by gray slate roofs and chimneys rising in symmetrical pairs, immediately reveals Georgian architecture at its most refined. 3 stories arranged with precision, sash windows lined up in perfect rows, and a central entrance flanked by neatly trimmed shrubs that speak to decades of continuous care. A wisteria vine spreads across part of the facade, blooming in shades of lilac each spring, softening the formality of the stonework with a touch of the wild. Stepping inside, the house proves even more generous than its front suggests. There are 6 bedrooms, 2 of them en suite, spread across the upper floors, along with studies, a spacious attic, and rooms totaling over 4,700 square feet of living space. The tall ceilings typical of the Georgian period and the balanced proportions of each room reinforce the sense of a house designed not simply to be lived in, but to impress visitors, precisely as the architecture of the period intended. But it is outside that this property truly sets itself apart. A cluster of stone barns, arranged around a courtyard, still retains much of its original structure, with recognized potential for conversion into livable space. A common feature on Welsh rural properties, where old barns often become studios, guest accommodation, or family annexes. Around them, the fields roll out in gentle waves, cut through by old hedgerows and pockets of woodland that blend into the valley's natural landscape. That landscape, in fact, carries a history stretching far beyond the Georgian era. The Towy Valley was fought over for centuries between Norman invaders and Welsh princes, and just a few kilometers away, traces still remain of a medieval motte castle built atop an even older Iron Age fort at Altiferan, layers of human occupation stacked here for more than 2,000 years. The village of Nancaredig, by contrast, grew much more recently, forming around a railway station opened in 1858 as part of what was known as the Vale of Towy Line, connecting the farming communities of the interior to the coast. Not far from there, Among Hill's local residents have long associated with the legendary wizard Merlin, the Merlin of Arthurian legend. Monks from Tally Abbey were already farming the land in the Middle Ages through an agricultural holding known as a grange. It is this blend of myth, agriculture, and history that gives the Towy Valley an atmosphere that seems to belong to several eras all at once. Life here follows the rhythm of the river itself. Anglers still cast for salmon in the waters of the Towy during the warmer months. The historic gardens of Aberglasney lie just minutes away, and the National Botanic Garden of Wales offers a cultivated counterpoint to the wilder landscape surrounding the property. It is a place where the scale of the land matters as much as the architecture of the house, where life is lived surrounded by space, not just walls. And it is precisely that scale that helps explain the asking price for this property. £1,600,000, a figure that accounts for both the Georgian house and the more than 100 acres of land, barns, and history that come with it. But if this property impresses through the sheer scale of its land, the next one takes us in a completely different direction, toward a far simpler, far older kind of building, and perhaps an even truer glimpse into the real rural character of Wales. If the previous house already seemed to take shape in the landscape from a distance, getting closer to Lanio Road brings a completely different feeling. This is about Georgian grandeur anymore, but about rural practicality, a house built to work, not to impress, on the outskirts of Tregoron, in the upland reaches of Ceredigion. The property sits on a 1.5 acres of land, with a white two-story house facing open fields that stretch out toward the first rolling foothills of the Cambrian Mountains in the distance. The gray-purple slate roof and side chimneys point to a simpler, more functional build, without the decorative excess of grander country houses, the kind of architecture shaped by and for families who lived off the land rather than families showing off their status. The entrance opens into an interior that's surprisingly spacious compared to what the facade suggests. 5 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and between 3 and 4 reception rooms, laid out in a way that favors practical use over formality. It's a house that seems to have grown gradually, adapting to the needs of different generations, rather than having been planned all at once. Outside, though, is where the property really reveals its purpose. A cluster of outbuildings spreads around the main house. A stable, a kennel, a workshop, and other structures that speak to decades of continuous agricultural and rural use. Landscape gardens have been cultivated around the main building, creating a deliberate contrast between the tended green close to the house and the wilder fields that begin just beyond the fence. And it's exactly this blend of practicality and open landscape that connects the property so naturally to the story of Tregoron. This small market town, set at the meeting point of the Brennig and Teafai rivers at the foot of the Cambrian Mountains, was granted its royal charter to hold weekly markets in 1292 by King Edward I, a privilege that turned Tregoron into one of the most important trading hubs of inland Wales. But it was in the 19th century that the town saw its greatest importance, becoming one of the main starting points for the drovers' route. Men who gathered enormous herds of cattle, sheep, and even geese to walk them, on foot, for weeks across the mountains to markets in England. Those drovers, in fact, left cultural marks that go far beyond the cattle trade. Out of the sheer need to communicate across long distances, they helped create some of the earliest informal banking and postal systems in Wales. Even today, the Talbot Hotel, a 17th century inn in the town center, still holds its original beams and fireplaces, where those drovers once gathered before setting off on their long journeys across the mountains. Just a few kilometers from the property lies the Corps' Care Nature Reserve, an expansive bog home to more than 170 bird species, and, decades ago, one of the first places in Britain where the nearly extinct red kite managed to recover and once again take to Welsh skies. Living here means accepting a rhythm set by the seasons and the work of the land, where the weekly market still brings local producers together, where the mountains are visible from almost any window, and where the silence is rarely broken by anything other than the wind or the distant bleating of sheep. And it is within that honest simplicity that the asking price for the property comes into focus. £545,000, a figure that reflects not the grandeur of the building, but the authenticity of a house that has always existed to serve life on the land, not to display it. If the previous property showed the working side of the Ceredigion uplands, this next one takes us back to something far older, not just in architecture, but in the entire landscape surrounding it, near the village of Llanboidy in the westernmost reaches of Carmarthenshire. At first glance, it looks like a simple farmhouse, standing alone amid fields that roll out in gentle waves as far as the eye can see, sheltered by tall hedgerows that shield it from the winds blowing up the valley. Seen from above, the property looks small against the vast green surrounding it, a reminder that, in this part of Wales, the landscape is almost always bigger than the building it holds. The white facade, topped by a slate roof in shades of gray-blue and a small glazed timber extension to the side, hints at renovations and additions over the years, without losing the humble character of its origins as a traditional farmhouse. There's no Georgian symmetry here, no ornamentation of grander estates, just the quiet solidity of a building meant to shelter its residents from the damp winters of inland Wales. Stepping inside, the house proves compact but well-used. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom with a separate shower, a spacious living room connecting to a kitchen with room to dine, along with a utility room and a veranda that seems designed specifically for taking in the views of the valley below. The gardens around the house have been tended with an almost picturesque care, creating small pockets of flowers and greenery that contrast with the vastness of the fields beginning just beyond the fence. That blend of domestic simplicity and monumental landscape is no coincidence. It's actually a direct reflection of Llanboidy's own history. The village's name likely derives from Old Welsh, meaning something close to Church of the Cowshed, a direct nod to the agricultural life that has always defined this region. Long before that, though, the earliest inhabitants had already left their mark. The remains of an Iron Age timber fort can still be traced near the village center, proof that this land was already settled and defended centuries before the arrival of Christianity. In the Middle Ages, Llanboidy became an important stop on the old drovers' route, the same cattle roads that crossed Wales toward English markets, and the village once held 4 taverns to serve travelers along the way. Not far away stands Whitland Abbey, founded by Cistercian monks and historically known as Tai Gwyn Ar Daff, the White House on the Tf, one of the birthplaces of Welsh monasticism, whose name eventually gave its name to the neighboring town of Whitland itself. Living in this region means accepting a gentle, almost contemplative isolation. The Lansker borderlands trails cross this landscape, connecting the remains of ancient forts, monastic ruins, and small stone churches, while village life follows the unhurried pace of a community that still speaks Welsh day to day and measures time more by the farming seasons than by the clock. And it is within that genuine, almost unassuming simplicity that the asking price for the property finally comes into view. £399,000, a figure that reflects not just the modest size of the house, but the quiet privilege of living surrounded by a landscape carrying more than 2,000. If the previous property took us to the oldest, most isolated corner of Carmarthenshire, this last one brings us back up into the mountains. More precisely, to the slopes of Llanelli Hill, a small village perched in the hills separating Monmouthshire from Brecknockshire, just a few kilometers from Abergavenny. At first glance, it looks like a contemporary home tucked quietly into the landscape. Low roof lines, horizontal forms, large windows framing the surrounding hills. But the land it sits on, roughly an acre of private space enclosed by mature trees and dense greenery, reveals a level of care that goes well beyond the architecture itself. Here, silence and privacy seem to have been designed with the same attention given to the rooms of the house. The building spreads out horizontally across the plot, with dark slate-pitched roofs and a row of dormer-style windows suggesting bright, generous interior spaces. Further back, among the trees, a heated outdoor pool sits on a timber deck, surrounded by space set aside for entertaining. A rare feature among properties in this region, more often associated with stables and barns than contemporary leisure spaces. Inside, the house brings together 4 bedrooms arranged in a flexible layout, 3 bathrooms, and 2 living spaces, all organized to make the most of natural light and views that open up in nearly every direction. There's a deliberate sense of retreat here, of escape, reinforced by direct access to trails that begin almost at the front door and climb straight up the mountainside. And it is precisely this relationship between the house and the mountain that ties the property to the wider story of the region. Llanelli Hill sits at the foot of the Blorange, one of the most recognizable peaks in the Brecon Beacons, whose summit still holds traces of a Bronze Age cairn and settlements dating back thousands of years. At the base of the mountain runs the Monmouthshire and Brecon Canal, built in the early 19th century to carry coal, lime, and iron ore down from the hills to the industrial valleys below, a time when this now peaceful landscape once buzzed with furnaces, quarries, and the constant sound of mining work. Not far away, the industrial landscape of Blaenavon, now recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, preserves the memory of an industrial revolution that reshaped South Wales. While Abergavenny, the market town giving access to this whole region, still holds the ruins of a Norman castle and traces of a Roman fort built centuries earlier to hold back the local Celtic tribes. It's a region where geological, industrial, and military history all stack up in visible layers around every bend in the road. Today, though, the Blorenge is better known for a different kind of activity. Paragliders and hang gliders regularly launch from its summit, riding the currents rising up the slope, while walkers cross the mountain's trails in every season of the year. Living in Llanelli Hill means waking up to that view almost every day, a rare balance between rural isolation and quick access to the everyday life of Abergavenny, just minutes away. And it is against that combination of landscape, privacy, and history that the asking price for this final property finally comes into view: £675,000. At the end of this journey through 5 properties hidden among hills, rivers, and mountains, one thing becomes clear. Inland Wales holds far more than affordable prices. It holds entire layers of history that rarely make it into any listing. We began in Nelson, standing before a Georgian facade that concealed even older origins. We moved on to the Towy Valley, where more than 100 acres of land carried traces of Norman castles and legends tied to Merlin himself. We passed through Tregaron, where a simple house reminded us of the era of the drovers and their long journeys on foot toward England. We reached Llanboidy, where an Iron Age fort still rests quietly beside a modest farmhouse. And we ended on the slopes of the Blorenge, in Llanelli Hill, where the industrial landscape of the past has given way to the silence of the mountains and the quiet flight of paragliders. Each of these houses, in its own way, proves the same thing: that there are still places in Britain where you can find space, silence, and history for a price that, elsewhere in the country, would barely buy something so complete. Wales, with its mountains, its valleys, and its communities still living by the rhythm of the land, remains one of the last truly authentic refuges in the United Kingdom. If this journey through these 5 properties has sparked your curiosity about inland Wales, let us know in the comments which of these houses caught your eye the most. And if you enjoy exploring with us the forgotten corners of the United Kingdom, its houses, its landscapes, and the stories they carry, subscribe to the channel now and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next journey, when we'll open the doors to a new British region full of secrets still waiting to be discovered.